Well, thanks for joining us for the second video that we're going to be doing on prayer. And tonight we're going to be starting all the way back into the book of Genesis, really looking at the relationship that God had with man, the degree of interaction that he had with man in his life. We're going to look at the very beginning of a communication with God in the form of prayer. And really sort of in the way to begin this, we really want to look at what the relationship with God might have been in the garden at the time of the creation. We know that we have Adam and Eve, or whether it was many Adams and Eves, and how many there were is really totally immaterial. But we want to look at the relationship that God had with man, and kind of follow that all the way through. Not only the Old Testament, but we're going to follow prayer, as we've said, all the way through to the writers in the New Testament. And as promised, we said we were going to define prayer in both the Hebrew and the Greek. And both Hebrew words and Greek words in the Scriptures have basically the same type of meaning and the same type of calling. And that is that it's a petitioning, a request to God, a supplication. We want something. God wants something, and to address God as an intercessor. And those words, both of course, they have a Greek word and a Hebrew word. They both carry about the same degree of meaning. And certainly, we know that in the Greek and the Israelite culture, prayer was a central aspect of their religious life, and it served as a means of communicating with God. And certainly, we want to think about what level of communication God might have had with Adam and Eve in the garden, and then as we follow them as they left the garden, what that correspondence was, and what types of things that they communicated to God. Mostly the prayers that were done in the community or in the Israelite thing were done by prophets or priests, and as an intercessory type prayers, or seeking God's favor and intervention in many things. And so the concept of prayer in the Hebrew Bible is deeply intertwined with the covenant type relationship that God had with his people. The study that we're going to be doing in the subsequent videos is not going to dispute the need or the value in prayer to God as a form of communication, or the needs and admiration of the Almighty God. It's focused on what we communicate, the heart behind what we're communicating, and what we really want to do is become in step with what God's focus is and what God's interested in as He communicates with us in the present world. And that we can do that by looking at the type of communication that God had with his people in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. And so for us to understand this, we really have to understand God and his interaction in the beginning. So with that, let's just get started. And what do you think it would be like if you had been Eve in the garden? What type of communication do you think might have been taking place?
Are you asking me?
I am.
I don't know. We think we know about everything. We think we figured all these things out, but they could have been doing digital. Maybe they texted. I don't know what they did.
Well,
but somehow they could read each other's hearts, and that's what God, I believe, was doing with Adam and Eve. And I mean, it seems like a nice place to live. So
yeah,
company.
Yeah, it's really kind of interesting because we know that there was some level of communication, because obviously when they sinned, the first thing they did was hide, because they knew God would have a certain response to their disobedience, and so they were hiding, and God called out to them. So there was some level of verbal type communication and we don't know how much that was or what it was. But we also know that if you look at their life as they lived in the garden, we know that God provided everything for them. He gave them, he had the food, they had shelter, they had protection. Obviously, I don't think there were probably any lions eating man in the garden, so they had total protection. God took care of all their needs from safety to to their physical needs. They had everything that they wanted, and that was really kind of what they had. As a matter of fact, in Genesis 1:28 through 31, it says, when God had created man, he said, God blessed them, Adam and Eve, and he said, be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over every living creature that moves on the ground. Then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. That will be yours for food, and to all the beasts of the earth and all the birds of the sky and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give even green plants for food. And it was so. And God saw that what he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning the sixth day. And certainly we know when he had finished the creation, that was really all that he could have probably made lots of other things, but when he had created man, that was the culmination of the creation that he had begun, and that he was totally satisfied with what he had done. And if you look at all those the things that he was going to provide, he told them to be fruitful and multiply. So obviously, his intent was that Adam and Eve, or man, would populate the garden, or the kingdom that he had created, and live there in harmony. Any comment you have about that?
No, but it must have been a nice place.
It must have been really nice. Yeah. Well, anyway, we know that as nice as it was, as a part of the creation, and you remember he said, let us create man in our own image. And the interesting thing about it is because of that part of the creation, man had the ability to make a choice, to choose between right and wrong, and the let us create man in our image, they had the capacity to make choices also. And in the case of Adam and Eve, they made a bad choice because they were disobedient to what God had told them they could do. Now that thread is going to carry out through from the time they were expelled from the garden all the way through to the end of the New Testament. We'll see how much focus and emphasis God places on respecting his authority and respecting his plan that he has put in place. Of course, we can see the whole picture. They could only see bits and pieces of it, and so they just had to take God's charge and God's direction as he handed it out. In Genesis 4:26. Beginning with verse 25, it says Adam made love to, this is after the Cain and Abel incident, and in 4:25 it says Adam made love to his wife again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth, saying, God has granted me another child in place of Abel, since Cain killed him. Seth also had a son, and his name was Enosh. At that time, people began to call on the name of the Lord. And this is the first reference that we have of man coming out of the garden and making some type of an appeal or some type of a call to God. And I did look up the Hebrew for the word, and really it's a phrase more than anything else. Call on the name of the Lord is sort of like a Hebrew phrase, but I think it's lishpah, I believe is the Hebrew word. I'm not a Hebrew scholar, but anyway, but it really means to call out, or to summons, or to make request, and that was the beginning of a correspondence to God. Now the question of it is that why do you think they would have seen a need to call out to God? What has changed from the garden environment to the environment where they are now on their own outside, having to provide for themselves. What's changed? Well, one is God's not providing everything for them. They're having to work the land and the soil, and they have to provide for themselves, and not only that, protect. And so I think they probably began to realize that God had given them so much, and they realized that they can't do this on their own, and that they really yearned for the continued direction and guidance from God that they had in the garden. And so they made this. They began to make this appeal and solicit the favor of God in a situation like this. We know that a little later in Genesis 5, we won't read this, but in 21 through 24, it says that Enoch walked faithfully with God. And this walking faithfully with God, we don't really know the specific details of that particular phrase, but we do know that if you walk with somebody, that really means that you're going in the same direction they're going. You're walking with them, and you're side by side, and so you're going in the same direction, the same focus, and the same directions they're going. It's sort of like the same thing that we've talked about in some other occasions that we've had to talk about fellowship. We talk about fellowship of believers and that. Well, if your fellowship is a sort of a two-worded word, it's a bunch of fellows on a ship, and if all these fellows are on the ship, guess what? They're going in the same direction, because the ship can only go in one direction. And so what you have is this whole idea of I'm going in the same direction that God's going, and my focus is His focus, and I want to stay in that direction. So you can chime in anytime you want to.
No chiming for me.
Well, later on in Genesis, in chapters 15, 16, and 17, there are a number of conversations that God has with Abram or Abraham about his offspring, and we see a lot of that conversation going on in there. And we won't go through that. I've made an effort to go through and read all the prayers, not just the conversations that God had, but prayers that man had made to God, offered up to God. But I haven't made any attempt to read off all the correspondence that God has back and forth with man. That would take forever. But since we're just focused on prayer in the sense of making an appeal or an intervention request to God, those are the things that we're going to be focusing on, and the content of what those prayers were about, and what caused them to fall into a request for God. In Genesis 25, where Isaac prays because he's childless and he wants something. And behind me, you'll see a list of the scriptures that we're going to be going through tonight. Hopefully you can see those, but these are the ones that we're going to be covering tonight in our video. But Genesis 25, 19 through 23 says this. This is the account of the family of the line of Abraham, son of Isaac. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean, from Pandan Aram, and the sister of Laban, the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. The babies jostled each other within her, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. The Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two people from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." Jacob bargains with God. Well, let's just stop there. In this particular passage, we see that Isaac makes an appeal to God because he wants something from God. There's something lacking in his life that he really yearns for, and that is an heir through Rebekah. And so this appeal or petition is a request to God to provide something that he needs. Later in Genesis 28, beginning with verse 20, Jacob bargains with God for something that he wants. It is a vow that he makes with God, but the vow has conditions that God must make or must meet. It says, then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God. And this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house, and all that you give me, I will give you a tenth. Now, I don't know. I mean, it just seems like that it's a pretty bold demand to make to the Creator, the one who created you, to say that, if you give me this, then you'll be my God. And I'm sorry, I'm just reading what the Scripture says. Don't throw me under the bus for that. But so what Jacob wanted, he wanted something, and he was asking God for it. And I guess really the question of it is, in a situation like this, have you ever made a request to God with expectations or demands, or you promise something if you get something, if God gives you something in advance? Have you ever done that?
Yes, I have done that more than one time. But I was thinking about how he was dealing with God. He has confidence that God could do something.
Right.
Now, sometimes we don't have confidence that he will do it, but they had confidence that he could do it. But my experience was when you were flying us to Toronto, our friends in the back seat of a 4-place plane, and you the pilot, and we were driving flying to Toronto. We came across a big heavy storm, and I was scared to death. And then my friend, I looked at her, we were in the back seat, and I said, it'll be okay, I'm sure, but I wasn't really sure. But I was promising all the way up and back there about him, please take care of our children while they're at home in Tennessee on the ground, and we're up in the air above Pittsburgh or wherever we were.
Well, and I'm glad you didn't throw me on the bus, and
No, I didn't.
of course we lived through it all. But I was sharing with the group the other night that there were, of course, being a chemical engineer, there were numerous times where I asked God, I said, if you'll just let me pass this thermodynamics test, I promise you, I'll promise my firstborn child. And I did that on numerous occasions. Just about every test I ever came across in that, I promised that, God, if you just let me make it through this, I'll grant you my firstborn. I guess that was probably the Hannah syndrome. I'm not real sure. But regardless of whether it actually followed through on that vow or not, I did pass the course.
And
But
you did have the child.
And I did have the child. I guess I owe God something.
Yes, I
think of
think
it.
so.
But anyway, so I think we do find ourselves in a situation where we make a request of God with certain strings. I won't say strings attached, but we have certain expectations.
Deal.
We want God to it's a quid quo pro type, situation, and so I think we've all been guilty of that in some cases, whether it's been literal or not. In Genesis 32, where we've seen where men in God's lineage have made requests to God for certain things, like children or protection. Jacob in Genesis 32, 9 through 12, it reads this way. It says, "Then Jacob prayed, O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, Lord, you who said to me, go back to your country and your relatives, and I will make you prosper. I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed this Jordan, but now I have become 2 camps. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid he will come and attack me, and also the mothers with their children. But you have said, I will surely make you prosper, and will make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted." In this particular thing, we see a prayer where Jacob is fearful, and he's crying out for protection. And certainly we can see this as we go through prayers in the Old Testament. We can see this tendency for the people, God's people, to be dependent on Him to rescue them from all manner of situations. And this particular prayer is one of the reasons why I picked this one out. There is a common theme that in most of the prayers that you read, certainly as we get more into the scriptures, the prayers, there is this beginning of an acknowledgement of the faithfulness and the kindness and the goodness of God as they go through these situations. And so we see that in Jacob, and certainly he was humbled by his position and what God had put him in, and yet he was depending on God and asking Him to protect him from the things that he needed.
In our case, as human beings that follow Jesus, in our case, we don't always receive the answer in the way that we want it to be given to us. We may be blessed, or God protects us, shelters us, but in how we get around to the actual ultimate problem or situation, it doesn't always come around the way we think it should, or we recognize it as from God.
Yeah. In each of these situations, we're going to coin a buzzword or a buzz phrase, and that is that in each of these situations that we're talking about here, these are life experiences that God's people are experiencing, and as they are confronted with a life situation, they are making a request or an appeal to God. And certainly, all of us are plagued, if you will, or we are faced with all kinds of situations in life where we are dependent on God to give us insight into how to deal with these situations. And we're going to see how people dealt with these life situations, if you will, certainly through these prayers, not only in the Old Testament, but we're also going to see how God's people dealt with life situations, which really are sort of more like our situations than they were situations in the Old Testament, how they dealt with them back in the beginning of the first church. But we just have to stay tuned and be patient until we get there. We see not only prayers for protection and for children and for other things, but there is a prayer that Moses makes in Exodus 17 verse 4. He says, and it's Moses was in a sense of peril. It says, "Then Moses cried out to the Lord, 'What am I to do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me.'" And so you see a situation where here's a life situation where Moses is faced with people who are persecuting him, and he's feeling really discouraged, and he's fearful, and so his life situation is to turn to God and please help me. Don't let these people do what they're proposing to do to me. And so they turn to God in the case of peril, and certainly I think that we tend to do that as well. But we'll get into that later. Just be patient. In Exodus 32, let me catch my breath here. In Exodus 32, verses 9 through 14, we're going to read that. It says, and in this particular case, it's dealing with the golden calf and how the people had kind of, I guess, really forgotten what God had done for them in taking them out of Egypt, and they rebelled against God. And so this is really just kind of a little synopsis of finding out how God views this whole situation. In verse 9 of 32, it says, "I have seen these people," the Lord said to Moses, "and they are a stiff-necked people. Now leave me alone so that my anger may burn against them and that I may destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation." But Moses sought favor of the Lord his God. "Lord," he said, "why should your anger burn against your people, whom you brought out of Egypt with a great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say it was with evil intent that you brought them out, to kill them in the mountains and wipe them off the face of the earth. Turn turn from your fierce anger, relent, and do not bring disaster on the people. Remember your servant Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, to whom you swore by your own self, I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give your descendants all this land. I promised them, and I will be their and it will be their inheritance forever. Then the Lord relented and did not bring on his people the disaster he had threatened. Now, one of the reasons why I picked this particular scripture is that it's kind of a shift from something that I need or something that I want into praying really and addressing needs of the people. And it really is kind of a heartwarming situation where Moses finds himself in a situation like this, and he really is concerned about the people, and it's really kind of unusual because Moses was a pretty fantastic guy, because he had the opportunity, or at least God was talking to him about, I'm going to wipe these people off the face of the earth, and I'm going to make you the one that's going to be the one that I'm going to bless. And the tendency might have been, from a worldly perspective, to say, okay, bring it on, get rid of them so I can be the number one cheese. And yet Moses' heart was that he was a servant of God, wanting to obey God, not with an agenda, but he just wanted to do what God wanted him to do, and that was his heart in that situation.
I was going to say that just shows his heart like Jesus' heart. Like we've been through a lot with Moses, and things he got frustrated, or he wanted to give up, or whatever he felt, but he didn't. He really cared about the people instead of just it being something for his sake or his well known. And I think that gives us a real good idea of the heart of Jesus, and that it matters what about praying. It matters what's in your heart, what it takes for you to be able to die to yourself. I think that's a big thing.
Yeah, this is another one of those life experiences that Moses has encountered, and sometimes another person's life experience or whatever is the lesson is not so much focused on, in this particular case, the ones who are in sin or rebellion, but God's discussion here and his plan might have been so that Moses could see his own heart and how he was going to deal with life situations when he was confronted with this. So sometimes life situations that may or may not be directly involved with us can be a tool that God uses to help us to see who we are in a similar situation.
That's true.
So it wasn't just for the people that were going to learn this lesson, but it was for Moses to realize that God's plan was going to be carried out, and that it really just was a good lesson for him. So in that life situation, we would say Moses checked out and did good. Well, as we know, the people were never without complaining, and we're going to read some passages in Luke 11. I mean Luke 11, Numbers 11, and Moses again prays for the people, and yet he has a discouraged heart. So we're going to read in Numbers chapter 11. We're going to read we're going to read some different passages, and I'll let you know when we skip in. But we're going to read 1 through 15 to begin with, and again the people are griping and complaining. It says, now the people complained about their hardships in the hearing of the Lord. Not a good thing to do sometimes, but if God hears everything, you can't get away from it, can you? It says, and when he heard them, his anger was aroused. Then fire from the Lord burned among them and consumed some of the outskirts of the camp. When the people cried out to Moses, he prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down, so that the place was called Taberah, because fire from the Lord had burned among them. The rabble with them began to crave other food, And again the Israelites started wailing and said, "If only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost. Also the cucumbers and the melons and leeks and onions and garlic. But now we have lost our appetite. We never see anything but manna." The manna was like coriander seed and looked like resin. The people went around gathering it and then ground it in a hand mill or crushed it in a mortar. They cooked it in a pot or made it into loaves, and it tasted like something made with olive oil. When the dew settled on the camp at night, the manna almost also came down. Moses heard the people of every family wailing at the entrance of their tents. The Lord became exceedingly angry, and Moses was troubled. He asked the Lord, "Why have you brought this trouble on our servant? What have I done to displease you that you have put this burden of all these people on me? Did I conceive all these people? Did I give them birth? Why do you tell me to carry them in my arms as a nurse carries an infant to the land you promised on oath to their ancestors? Where can I get meat for all these people? They keep wailing to me, 'Give us meat to eat.' I cannot carry all these people by myself. The burden is too heavy for me. If this is how you are going to treat me, please go ahead and kill me. If I have found favor in your eyes, and do not let me face my own ruin." Well, certainly, when you read that passage, you can't just say that the Israelites were the ones who were doing some complaining, because Moses himself was a little bit discouraged, and he was obviously was complaining a little bit on his own. And yet he was still a little bit sensitive to the people's needs. And let's skip on down to verse 21. We'll read 21 through 23. But Moses said, I am among 600,000 men on foot, and you say, I will give them meat to eat for the whole month. Would they have enough for flocks and herds were slaughtered for them? Would they have enough if all the fish in the sea were caught for them? The Lord answered Moses, Is the Lord's arm too short? Now you will see whether or not what I say will come true for you. And so, this is a situation where we know the story about the quail and later on we'll see they get sick of it and they have a plague. But the point of this is that here's another life situation, and Moses, rather than handling it in a confident mode and really just totally relying on God, has a pity party about the circumstances, and God is using this life situation to expose Moses' heart in the situation. And he just says, look, this may be impossible to what you can see or what you understand, but nothing is impossible for me. And so obviously he fulfills that, and then they move on. So any observation?
Well, when I was growing up in my religious training that I had, something like this was very scary to me, because I was taught that you would never talk to God like this. Like you would never raise your fist or be angry or be upset or share your feelings of that, because it would be so disrespectful of God and who he was. And so I had a hard time putting these two things together. The God who I thought was a ruler and mean in a lot of ways, and the God that would be able to hear all this and be compassionate and loving the way Jesus would listen to whatever was going on and sympathize or understand or try to give them the word to follow that was better. Mm-hmm. And I think that we've all had those experiences where I went from not being able to really talk to God to walking around a track at the school one time just saying, no, I'm really upset with you. And I never thought I'd hear myself talk to God like that. Mm-hmm. But it freed me to be able just to say my own feelings.
Yeah, that's a great point, because in a couple of these instances, especially like with Jacob and certainly on numerous occasions with Moses, if we were in the same situation and it came up with the same conversation, we think that lightning was going to come from the sky and strike us dead on the spot. But what it really shows is God's heart and His willingness to let us learn life's lessons and come out the stronger person as a consequence of it. God is a merciful God and a just God, and he gave Moses an opportunity to see this part of who he is through the experience that he had in this particular incident. And certainly the hearts of the people were going to be exposed, but the real heart was that Moses had to learn to deal with a life lesson so he could become the great leader that he was. So
That's good.
okay, let's skip over to Numbers chapter 16, and this is the incident where people began to rebel against Moses as their leader, and we know this if you're a Bible scholar, like I'm sure most of you maybe are. But this is the incident where the 250 Israelites rebel, and beginning in the middle of verse 2, it says, with them, this is again Numbers 16, it says, with them were 250 Israelite men, well-known community leaders who had been appointed members of the council. They came as a group to oppose Moses and Aaron and said to them, you have gone too far. The whole community is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is with them. Why then do you set yourselves above the Lord's assembly? And we're going to kind of skip a lot of this just for brevity of time. So we'll continue the thought, but we'll jump down to verse 6. And it says here, it says, then he said, verse 6. Wow. It says, you, Korah, and all your followers are to do this. Take, let's see.
Censors.
Yeah, take censers. About to lose my voice. Take censers and tomorrow put burning coals and incense in them before the Lord. The man the Lord chooses will be the one who is holy. You Levites have gone too far. Moses also said to Korah, now listen, you Levites, isn't it enough for you that God of Israel has separated you from the rest of the Israelite community and brought you near himself to do the work of the Lord's tabernacle and to stand before the community and minister to them? He has brought you and all your fellow Levites near himself. But now you are trying to get the priesthood too. It is against the Lord that you and all your followers have band together. Who is Aaron that you should grumble against him? Then Moses summons Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, but they said, we will not come. Isn't it enough that you have brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in this wilderness? And now you also want to lord it over us. Moreover, you haven't brought us into the land flowing with milk and honey, or given us an inheritance of fields and vineyards. Do you want to treat these men like slaves? No, we will not come. And then skipping down to verse 20, it says, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, separate yourselves from this assembly so I can put an end to them at once. But Moses and Aaron fell face down and cried out, O God, the God who gives birth to all living things, will you be angry with the entire assembly when only one man sins? Then the Lord said to Moses, say to the assembly, move away from the tents of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. And certainly we know the consequence of that. He wipes them out. But says the very next day the earth opens up and swallows them up. Going down to verse 41, it says the next day the whole Israelite community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. You have killed the Lord's people, they said, and this is swallowing up. But when the assembly gathered in opposition to Moses and Aaron and turned toward the tent of meeting, Suddenly the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. Then Moses and Aaron went to the front of the tent of meeting, and the Lord said to Moses, "Get away from this assembly, so I can put an end to them at once." And they fell face down. Then Moses said to Aaron, "Take your censer and put incense in it along with burning coals from the altar, and hurry to the assembly to make atonement for them. Wrath has come from the Lord. The plague has started." So Aaron did as Moses said and ran into the midst of the assembly. The plague had already started among the people, but Aaron offered an incense and made atonement for them. He stood between the living and the dead, and the plague stopped. But 14,700 people died from the plague, in addition to those who had died because of Korah. Then Aaron returned to Moses at the entrance of the tent of meeting, for the plague had stopped. Now we could spend days talking about all the life lessons that are there, but what we see is again Moses and Aaron stepping up and protecting the people, and really we see God's heart toward rebellion, but we also see in the case of Moses and Aaron a willingness to do whatever they can do to protect the innocent or the people, and rather drastic measures, if you will. Any comment about that?
No, it was just such a big story.
Yeah, it is.
It's hard.
I want to read one more passage, and then we'll kind of call it an evening. But it's in Deuteronomy chapter 4, and this is really kind of a long passage, but it's a powerful prayer for the people, and it reveals God's heart toward righteousness. In the other passages, we've seen God's heart toward rebellion, and how seriously He takes it, and takes rather drastic measures to do that. And we've also seen the heart of men who've taken life stories and took a stand for the righteous and protection of the people. In Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 4, it says, "When I went up to the mountain to receive the tablets of stone, the tablets of the covenant of the Lord had made..."
Right?
What?
Deuteronomy 9.
Deuteronomy 9, verse 4.
Oh,
What did I
I'm
say?
sorry.
I'm sorry, I
That's what
skipped.
you said.
Yeah, thank you. I got ahead of myself.
Okay.
Deuteronomy 9, verse 4 says, "After the Lord your God has driven them out before you, do not say to yourself, 'The Lord has brought me here to take possession of this land because of my righteousness.' No, it is on account of the wickedness of those nations that the Lord is going to drive them out before you. It is not because of your righteousness or your integrity that you are going to take the possession of their land, but on account of the wickedness of these nations. The Lord your God will drive them out before you to accomplish what He swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Understand then that it is not because of your righteousness that the Lord your God is giving you this good land to possess, for you are a stiff-necked people." And I want to pause there just for a minute. It emphasizes just exactly how intentional God has in carrying out His plan, regardless of what the attitude of the people. He has a focus on God's people taking this land, and in spite of their objections and their sin, He really is bringing them forward to do this, and He wants to make sure they understand what's going on here, that it's His will, not their righteousness, that all these things are happening. Verse 7, "Remember this and never forget how you aroused the anger of the Lord your God in the wilderness. From the day you left Egypt until you arrived here, you have been rebellious against the Lord. At Abram, you aroused the Lord's wrath so that He was angry enough to destroy you. When I went up on the mountain to receive the tablets of stone, the tablets of the covenant of the Lord had made for you, I stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. I ate no bread and drank no water. The Lord gave me 2 stone tablets inscribed by the finger of God. On them were all the commandments the Lord proclaimed to you on the mountain out of the fire on the day of the assembly. At the end of 40 days and 40 nights, the Lord gave me the 2 stone tablets, the tablets of the covenant. Then the Lord told me, go down from here at once, because your people, whom you brought out of Egypt, have become corrupt. They have turned away quickly from what I commanded them, and have made an idol for themselves. And the Lord said to me, I have seen the people, they are stiff-necked people indeed. Let me alone, so that I may destroy them and blot out their name from under heaven, and I will make you into a nation stronger and more numerous than they. So I turned and went down the mountain, and while it was ablaze with fire, and the 2 tablets of the covenant were in my hands, when I looked, I saw that you had sinned against the Lord your God. You had made yourselves an idol cast of the shape of a calf. You had turned aside quickly from the way that the Lord had commanded you. So I took the 2 tablets and threw them out of my hands, breaking them into pieces before your eyes. Then once again I fell prostrate before the Lord for 40 days and 40 nights. I ate no bread and drank no water because of all the sin you had committed, doing what was evil in the Lord's sight, and so arousing the anger. I feared the anger and wrath of the Lord, for he was angry enough with you to destroy you. But again the Lord listened to me, and the Lord was angry enough with Aaron to destroy him. But at that time I prayed for Aaron too. Also I took that sinful thing of yours, the calf you made, and burned it in the fire. Then I crushed it and ground it to powder, as fine as dust, and threw it in the air, threw the dust into the stream that flowed down the mountain. You also made the Lord angry at Taberah, at Meshah, and at Cabroth Hatha. When the Lord sent you out from Kadesh Barnea, he said, go up and take possession of the land I have given you. But you rebelled against the command of the Lord your God. You did not trust him or obey him. You have been rebellious against the Lord ever since I have known you. I lay prostrate before the Lord those 40 days and 40 nights, because the Lord had said he would destroy you. I prayed to the Lord and said, Sovereign Lord, do not destroy your people, your own inheritance that you redeemed by your great power and brought out of Egypt with a mighty hand. Remember your servant Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Overlook the stubbornness of these people, their wickedness and their sin. Otherwise, the country from which you brought us will say, because the Lord was not able to take them into the land he had promised them, and because he hated them, he brought them out and put them to death in the wilderness. But they are your people, your inheritance, that you brought out by your own great power, your outstretched arm. You know, when I think about that particular prayer, it is really an ultimate seeking God's favor and reminding not only the people who might have heard this, but really just a recap of the life type situations that Moses had faced during all that time. Any comment?
I was just thinking that God is so serious here in this story and this example, and he's so serious. It's like a lot of times we like to take God for granted and say, well, he'll ease away from what he originally said or meant. But this doesn't prove that he does, even though it probably hurt him to hurt the people. But the thing is, when you see what Moses did, what would we do to save somebody? Would we fast 40 days? Would we lay on our face like he did? What would we do just to save another person if we could save them? Like, I think of the fires in LA, that people with families, they would do anything to get their family out of there.
Right.
And I think sometimes I've lost my edge on what I would do to help somebody know Jesus.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting about this whole thing about, the salvation of the people. It's one thing to focus on physical needs, about what I eat, and the discomfort type complaining and stuff like that. But this is a plea of people who are going to be destroyed, who are going to be, forever wiped off the face of the earth. And you see a greater sense of urgency and a greater sense of compassion on the part of Moses, mm-hmm. To make this appeal, because he knew this is it, man. If this doesn't get turned around, this is not going to turn out good. And so we see the sense of urgency about people who are about to be lost, and I think that we want to not forget that. This has been sort of a long thing, but it begins to give us a feel for what types of prayers, what types of things that people were focusing on during this particular part of God's history, not just history, but the unfolding of God's plan to continue His communication with man. So we're going to end that tonight. I hope you'll join us for the next one, and we will see you. Have a great evening.
We love you guys.